Automating procurement and accounts payable processes is at the heart of any CFO's priorities. From a compliance standpoint, getting the process right is essential, but if the process is not automated, it can take up many resources and place an unnecessary administrative burden on the organization. In this demonstration, we look at how Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations can help automate the process end to end. My name is Henrik Marx Larsen, and I've been working with Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations and its predecessors since 1997. For many years, I have worked internationally as an IT professional implementing line of business applications, but today I work as a technology specialist at Microsoft. We will now look at how we automate the procure-to-pay process in Dynamics 365. The process is initiated by a purchase order which is sent to the vendor. Once the purchase order has been delivered, I will show how we use invoice capture to process and ingest the invoice we receive from the vendor via email. Next, we look at how we can automate the review and approval process using policies, process automation, and workflows. Once the invoice has been approved, we settle the invoice by creating, reviewing, and posting a payment journal. In this demonstration, we meet 5 people who are all involved in the process. Inga, the purchasing agent, is responsible for buying goods and services within the office equipment category. Julia, the AP clerk, is responsible for processing supplier invoices. Alicia, the warehouse worker, who receives the laptops into the warehouse. Davis, the office manager, owns the budget for office equipment and must approve all costs above $100. And lastly, Vincent, who works in the sales office for Acme Office Supplies, who will supply the laptops. Now that we know the people involved in the process, we will look at how the process is handled in Dynamics 365. The first use case we will look at is purchasing. The product we are purchasing in this scenario is a Microsoft Surface laptop. We will be using master planning to calculate what needs to be purchased based on the min-max coverage setup. Since the inventory level is 0 when we start out, we should expect master planning to suggest a purchase order for 25 pieces. In the demonstration I'm about to show, Inga is notified by the master planning job that a new planned order for 25 pieces of the Microsoft Surface laptop is required, because the stock level has fallen below the 5 pieces minimum threshold. Inga opens the email, and by clicking on the link in the email, she goes straight to the planned order record in Dynamics 365. From here she can review and firm the planned order so it becomes a purchase order. Since the vendor, Acme Office Supplies, is set up for vendor collaboration, Inga opens the newly created purchase order, reviews it, and sends it electronically to the vendor. Once Vincent has reviewed and accepted the purchase order, Inga receives a notification and she goes and accepts the changes suggested by Vincent. When the changes are accepted, the purchase order is automatically confirmed. Let's see how it all looks in action. Inga receives a notification in her inbox telling her that a planned purchase order for 25 new Surface laptops has been created. Inga clicks on the link in the email to review the planned order. The planned order looks fine, and she uses the Firm button to convert the planned order into an actual purchase order. Next, she uses the firming history to jump to the newly created purchase order. Since the supplier Acme Office Supplies is set up for vendor collaboration, she sends the order for confirmation electronically. Vincent, who works in sales at Acme Office Supplies, receives an email asking him to confirm a purchase order from Contoso. Vincent uses the link in the email to jump straight to the purchase request in the vendor collaboration portal. Contoso has requested delivery on 9th of October, but Acme is not able to deliver until the 13th of October. Therefore, Vincent changes the confirmed delivery date. Vincent accepts the order with a changed delivery date and makes a note of the change to Contoso. Twice daily, Julia checks on purchase orders accepted or rejected by vendors. She opens the purchase order preparation workspace and uses the list of purchase orders in external review to process new updates. She sees that Acme Office Supplies has responded to her request and opens the latest response. She finds that the confirmed delivery date is later than she requested, but accepts the change. Since the vendor is set up for auto confirmation, the order is confirmed automatically as soon as Julia accepts the proposed change. Once the purchase order is confirmed, David receives an email. This is because David is the budget owner for office equipment and will eventually receive the invoice for approval. Let's look at how the process was automated. In the first step, the planned purchase order was generated automatically by master planning. An alert rule in Dynamics 365 was used to trigger a Power Automate flow through the business events framework. This resulted in the email being sent to Julia. In the second step, Julia affirms the planned order and the purchase order is automatically created. In the third step, Julia sends the purchase order for confirmation with the vendor. Because the vendor is set up for vendor collaboration, the purchase order automatically changes status to in external review. Again, an alert rule is used to trigger the Power Automate flow, which sends the email to the vendor. Julia uses a workspace list to see only the purchase order responses she needs to process. Once the purchase order is confirmed, the confirmation job triggers a Power Automate flow through the business events framework. The Power Automate flow generates an email to the budget owner. Now that the purchase order has been confirmed with Acme Office Supplies, we take a look at how the goods are received in the warehouse. David realizes that he needs laptops for new employees. At Contoso, inventory and supply queries are normally handled through bots. David uses the procurement and sourcing bot to query the inventory level for Surface laptops. Realizing that the inventory level is 0, he queries the confirmed purchase order to ascertain when the laptops will be available in the warehouse. In the meantime, Vincent ships the laptops to Contoso. Alicia, the warehouse worker, uses the purchase order receipt and follow-up workspace to identify shipments arriving in the coming week. The shipment from Acme Office Supplies has arrived and she makes the receipt. Once the shipment has been received, notifications are sent to David and Inga. As mentioned, David is using the procurement and sourcing bot to query inventory and purchase orders. First, David uses the bot to ask about the inventory for item number 1000. As you can see, the inventory is 0, so David instead queries the status of the purchase order he was notified about. David starts a new query. He sees that the purchase order is confirmed for receipt on 13th of October, which is fine because he needs the laptops for new employees starting on 1st of November. He is also asked if he would like to be notified when the goods are received in the warehouse. He responds yes, and he is now awaiting to be notified. The goods are now shipped by Acme Office Supplies to Contoso. To get an overview of what Alicia must receive, she uses a predefined query with shipments expected to be received in the coming week. A shipment from Acme Office Supplies has arrived in the receiving bay and she finds the related purchase order on the list. To help put away the goods in the warehouse, she produces a receipts list. She takes the goods to the appropriate place in the warehouse and returns to register the put away. Once the put away has been registered, she produces a product receipt. As you can see, she updates the product receipt with the quantity she has registered. The goods are now available for use in the warehouse, and David and Inga automatically receive an email notification. As you can see, David is notified about the product received via email. In the first step, David uses a Power Virtual Agent bot to interact with data from Dynamics 365. The bot calls several Power Automate flows to make the connection to Dynamics 365. Step 4 is using the same approach, but when David says yes to being put on a notification list, we're using a custom table in Dataverse to hold the information. When the product receipt is produced, a Power Automate flow is triggered by a business event. The Power Automate flow fetches email addresses from the Dataverse table and emails the user on the list. Now that Contoso has received the goods from Acme Office Supplies, let's look at how we process the invoice. In the first step, Vincent generates an invoice in PDF format and sends it to Contoso via email. The invoice is automatically picked up by the Invoice Capture app and processed based on the predefined configuration and model training. Invoice Capture also ingests the invoice into pending invoices in Dynamics 365. In Dynamics 365, an AP automation job has been set up to automatically match the invoice with the product receipt and purchase order. Once the matching has been performed, the invoice is automatically submitted for review and approval by another AP automation job. Inga receives the invoice for review to confirm that Contoso has received the correct goods. Once the review has been completed, the invoice is sent for approval by David, who is the budget owner for office equipment. This is the invoice Vincent is sending to Contoso. This is how the invoice looks in Invoice Capture, once it has been processed and ingested in Dynamics 365. Since the invoice processing passed the quality thresholds defined by Julia, the invoice was processed automatically. If this has not been the case, Julia could have corrected any incorrect values as part of the invoice review. Invoice Capture would have learned by the input provided by Julia and used this corrected behavior on the next invoice from Acme Office Supplies. The invoice has been ingested into Dynamics 365 with the captured values. The captured image is shown in a side-by-side view. As you can see, the AP automation jobs have automatically completed the matching and submitted the invoice to workflow. Inga has received a notification in Teams. From the notification, she opens the invoice and checks that everything is in order. From Teams, Inga completes the review request. This is not a step in the automated process, but if there was a holdup in the process or Inga was asked about the status of an invoice, she can use the simplified workflow history to quickly get an overview of where the invoice sits in the flow. As you can see, after Inga completed the purchase order review, David approved the invoice. When Vincent submits the invoice to the Contoso mailbox, a channel has been configured in Invoice Capture to automatically pick it up and start processing. Other channels such as OneDrive or SharePoint can also be used. If invoice capture can process the invoice is automatically ingested into Dynamics 365 through the AP Automation API. AP Automation background jobs automatically match the invoice and submit it to workflow. A Power Automate flow is triggered by the workflow through a business event and creates an approval request in Teams. The flow waits for the user to respond and updates the workflow item in Dynamics 365 using an OData action. So now to the last use case. In this use case, we complete the process by paying Acme office supplies. Julia has defined a process automation schedule in Dynamics 365, which automatically generates payments every morning at 7 a.m. Julia receives an email notification when new payment journals have been created. Julia reviews the new payment journal and submits it for approval by David. David reviews and approves the payment journal. Again, Julia receives a notification and generates a check for Acme office supplies. Through automation, all approved payment journals are automatically posted in the evening. Julia receives a notification in her inbox telling her that a new payment journal has been created. Julia opens the journal and reviews the content. Happy with the content, she submits the journal for approval by David. David receives an approval request in Teams. He uses the attached link to open and review the journal. Satisfied with the content, he approves the journal. Julia is notified about the approval in an email. She opens the journal using the link and generates a check for Acme office supplies. In step 1 and 2, we use AP process automation to automatically generate a new payment journal. An alert rule is used to trigger a Power Automate flow, which sends an email to Julia. In step 3, we are again using the workflow business event to trigger a Power Automate flow. The flow creates an approval request in Teams. Once David has approved the payment journal, the Power Automate flow continues by sending an email to Julia. So we have now reached the end of the demonstration. I hope you found it interesting. In the demonstration, I've showed how we can combine Microsoft 365, the Power Platform, and Dynamics 365 to fully automate the purchase-to-pay process end-to-end. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching.